Americans are feeling the sting of inflation, while the mainstream media is doing its best to gaslight us about it. I think they want to make our heads explode. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. If you're breathing, you're likely aware that just living has become more expensive. And if you're watching this video in the future, breathing used to be free before it was made into a premium subscription you had to pay for, like Netflix. Chances are you don't have a very rosy view of the economy. And you're not alone. A December 2023 CBS News survey found that almost 2/3 of people think the condition of the U.S. economy is bad. A lot of this is being driven by people's perspective of inflation. Inflation is obviously viewed negatively, especially since Americans typically don't like it when prices go up, even more so when their wages don't keep up. Another recent CBS News poll showed more than 3/4 of respondents didn't think their income was keeping up with inflation. Now, inflation isn't anything new. It's the reason your grandpa tells you when he was a boy he could buy 3 hot dogs and an ice cream cone for a nickel. Man, they had it so easy. Minus that whole polio thing. The value of the US dollar has been going down for decades, but it's been so bad over the past few years under President Biden, it could cost him the 2024 election. Especially considering most Biden voters don't see a thriving economy under him. As a matter of fact, Biden's economic policies are proving to be so unpopular that Democrats are ditching the Bidenomics messaging. It has such a horrible connotation that they had to change the name. It's kind of like how Google was originally called Backrub. Of course, back rubs are also something Democrats don't want everyone associating with Joe Biden. Even though many Americans see inflation as the biggest problem the U.S. is facing, mainstream media outlets have something entirely different to say. Towards the beginning of the inflation trend, news media outlets reported the inflation scare didn't match reality. Inflation looks bad now, but it's pretty much sticking to the script. Turned out, the script was for Hunger Games. After they couldn't deny inflation was happening, the next message was inflation can actually be good for everyday Americans. But then the messaging shifted in 2023. Mainstream media outlets went from saying inflation is good for people to saying that Americans don't recognize that inflation is down. In fact, we were told the U.S. economy is booming with a blockbuster performance. That blockbuster was the Hunger Games. But notice how they describe Americans. They paint us as being sour because of inflation. The impression you get from reading these kinds of articles is that Americans are idiots and ignorant of how well the economy is actually functioning. Inflation is slowing, but most Americans are just too dumb to realize it. The economy is humming. Why so grumpy? The Atlantic took it a step further by saying that Americans hate a good economy. And now, guess what? Inflation is your fault. If people are so mad about high prices, why do they keep buying so many expensive things? Because my car doesn't run on dreams. It runs on gas, expensive gas. In some ways, Americans have nobody to blame but themselves. So the mainstream media went from saying inflation is good for you to inflation ain't that bad to inflation is your fault. Well, let's take a look at that claim in a moment. But first, let's take a quick coffee break. Well, what kind of coffee am I drinking? Why, it's Days coffee, of course. And I want to tell you why I love this particular coffee so much. For one, it has very low acidity compared to most coffees. That makes it taste a lot better. It's not bitter like most coffees, and it's gentle on my tummy. It has only 15% of the caffeine of a regular coffee. That's good for reducing caffeine dependency, and I can also enjoy multiple cups of coffee a day. And it's just the right amount of kick I need without jitters or a caffeine crash. How does Days make this special coffee? Well, first, they collect only premium grade coffee beans from Colombia, Guatemala, Brazil, and Ethiopia. Then they treat the beans with 50 enzymes and ferment them. It's a patented process developed by a former cancer researcher at Yale Medical School, along with a team of South Korean scientists. Another great thing about their fermentation process is that it completely gets rid of mycotoxins. Those are toxins produced by mold and fungi you might find in some cheaper brands of coffee beans. But you won't find them in Days. So believe me, Days coffee is very, very good. It's got notes of chocolate, butterscotch, brown sugar, and nuttiness. The beans are roasted in New York's Hudson Valley. So when you order Days Coffee using my link below, you'll get a special discount, and once you order it, they'll roast it right before they ship it to you. So it's just about as fresh as you can get by mail. So click below to try it out. So what's the mainstream media's argument that the economy is actually good and we're all idiots? Well, some point to enhanced unemployment benefits and stimulus payments under Biden during COVID as reasons to celebrate a strong U.S. economy. They also point to job growth rates under the Biden administration. Except they're basing that on the rock bottom low it hit during the pandemic, so that's not actually a good argument. They also often look at macroeconomic indicators like increased GDP growth rates from quarter to quarter. Sure, you can't afford gas and groceries, but GDP is up. As for inflation, they focus a lot on comparing the rate of increased prices in consumer goods over time. I know that probably sounds like word soup. I'll explain. Government data does indicate that consumer price index rates, which are a gauge for inflation, have gone from a peak of over 9% to around 3% at the time of this recording. So the MSM is like, see, inflation rates are down. 3 is less than 9. And they think you're too stupid to understand what that means. All that means is that prices are still rapidly increasing, just not as rapidly as they were. Hooray! Prices are still higher than they were the year before, which in turn were higher than the year before that, and so on. That's like saying that a purse snatcher is still getting away, but they're just not getting away as fast as they were before. You're still losing money either way. People don't think, wow, the price of milk only increased by 3% this year instead of last year's 9%. People typically think, I remember only spending $3 on milk before the pandemic, now I'm paying more than $4? Or more than $11 if you're buying oat milk from Whole Foods. But that's your choice. People are clearly upset that this is happening, so mainstream news media outlets are doing their best to pretend it's not. CBS pumped out stories about how inflation was slowing, and how the U.S. economy is doing even better than the government thought. Other outlets went really far, like New York Magazine, when it speculated that people aren't really complaining about inflation, but are engaging in moral panic over things like, I kid you not, sexual promiscuity. Yeah, because when normal people complain about inflation, they're not complaining about prices, they're really fear-mongering over social issues. Totally makes sense. If that were the case, they would be happy about inflation, since a bad economy would put a lot of sex shops out of business. The bad economy is a moral one. But the media does admit that Americans today need an extra $11,000 just to afford the same basic standards they enjoyed in 2021. I imagine that's what Americans are upset about. We are seeing huge increases in the cost of everything, from groceries to rent. To boot, U.S. housing is also notoriously unaffordable. Even if you owned a home before ramped up mortgage rates and prices, property taxes have gone up. Good luck trying to move to a new place without financially ruining yourself. Even just eating out is a financial challenge these days. According to a recent survey conducted by Global Strategy Group, half of respondents can't afford to go out to a restaurant, and 2/3 can't afford a vacation. A meal at Red Lobster should not make someone think, I'm never going to financially recover from this. A meal at Red Lobster should make them think, I'm never going to physically recover from this. Oddly enough, in defense of inflation, mainstream outlets like CNN pointed to expectations that increased wages will eventually catch up with price increases, which in turn will give people more money to pay off mortgages and student loans. In actuality, this is the real-world example of what economists call the Hume-Cantillon effect. It goes like this. Government prints money today and spends it at tomorrow's prices. Big businesses get their cut and spend it at next week's prices. Then small businesses get their cut and spend it at next month's prices. And finally, wage earners get their cut and spend it at next quarter's prices. It's kind of like a financial human centipede, where the average Joe is at the very back of the line. But don't worry, I'm sure wages will eventually match high prices. So just calm down and take a deep breath, before breathing is turned into a premium subscription you have to pay for. Now, if you're feeling down on life, just be glad you're not as big a failure as the people behind the day before. For more, check out the latest episode of my new show, Deep Thoughts While Gaming. Let me know what you think. And you can take comfort in knowing that supporting America Uncovered on Patreon won't contribute to inflation. Click that orange button to contribute. We really need it if we want to survive Bidenomics. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.